But I'm Simon Rosenberg from NDN and MPI. We're excited about this event today, and I just want to warn everybody that all four of us are using PowerPoints, or presentations anyway, so just get used to watching that screen over there and not us. But we've got a wonderful event today that is one in a series of events we've been doing over the last few years about how media is changing advocacy and communications in politics, and that this one is about sort of one that's very close to my heart as a former television producer and writer, about how TV itself is changing. And we have done a lot of work at NDN in trying to advise the progressive movement about how this media transformation is affecting everything we do. This is one of the, I think, the most interesting events that we've done in the 3 years since we began NPI in the spring of 2005. And before we begin, and I'm going to introduce everybody after I sit down, what I'd like to do is just remind everybody a little bit about some of the things we've been saying to sort of set up this whole event today. So we're going to move slowly over to that screen over there. And so first of all, the essential argument that we make is that there's a new politics emerging in America, and that it has three components. That first is that there's a new radical set of media and technology tools that are changing the way we all communicate and advocate, that we are also seeing an incredible rapid shift of our population, perhaps the most significant change in the people of the United States since the Europeans arrived here a long time ago, and that also there's the emergence of a whole new set of governing challenges, very 21st century in nature, and that these three things together are creating a 21st century politics that are very different from the politics of the 20th century. What we have done through NPI is spend a lot of time talking about the media and tech transformation. And we have put out 8 papers to help all of you understand how to navigate all this. And they are Buy Cable, Engage the Blog, Speak in Spanish, Use Search, right? Reimagine Video, Go Mobile, Leverage Social Networks, and Target Your Marketing. These are free. They're on our website at newpolitics.net. There's video backing all of them up. They're being widely used in the progressive movement today. And this has really been our contribution to the family to try to help everybody what are universal challenges, no matter where you sit. Whether you're a communications director for a state representative in Ohio or you're the communications director of the DNC, all of us are facing these same set of challenges in how media is transforming. And what's important to remember as we're going to talk about TV today, the most important media in politics, is that we are really coming to the end of one very long era of political communications and the beginning of a new one. And just to remind us, that we began this era that we call the broadcast era of political communications back in the 1920s and 1930s with the advent of radio. And those are all black and white images. They look old, but radio was as radical in that day as the internet is today. And when FDR started speaking regularly to the citizens of the United States, it was the first time in human history that a leader was able to speak directly in real time to his own voters or his own citizens, and it created much greater intimacy and created literally a new politics of that day, of which FDR was clearly a master. What we know about broadcast, though, is it didn't sit still, and this is informative for us as we look at the media tech change today, is that broadcast evolved, and television came along. It was slowed down by World War II, but it came about, and where politics and TV collided was really in the 1960s, starting with the Kennedy-Nixon debates, that famous Daisy ad in 1964, the social change movements in the 60s that came into America's living room as never before. And so our relationship, again, changed because of media to politics. And what politics really became about, starting in the 1960s, was fundamentally about mastering television. Whether it was the 30-second spot or the 8-second soundbite on the evening news, the whole goal of politics was about getting on TV. And even to the point in the 1992 Clinton campaign, when I was in the war room, we renamed GOTV to be Get on Television, right? Instead of Get Out the Vote. It was that obsessive to us in the 92 campaign. But that world of 20th century broadcast, this construct that we call broadcast, is breaking up, right? These 4 key pillars of 20th century political communications are giving way to a new one. And let's just look at these numbers. They're kind of amazing. Every time I look at these, newspaper circulation is plummeting in the United States, right? You're seeing, this is the first 6 months of 2006, huge precipitous drop in readership of newspapers, even very good newspapers, right? These aren't bad newspapers. We're seeing huge precipitous drops in radio usage, which is very important for progressives because conservatives dominate radio so much in the United States, right? And then what we're talking about today is about television, and that television has left the broadcast era of communications and is now in this new state where it is transforming, and that's really what we're going to be spending the rest of today talking about. A couple things just to put on the table, because we're not going to cover everything today, is that the first big change that came about through the challenge to broadcast was the rise of cable, right? In 2001, on a daily basis, more people were watching cable than broadcast. I mean, it's not well known in this city that that was the case. There were more eyeballs 7 years ago watching more cable than broadcast. We're going to get into this a little bit more later, the rise of DVRs. This is going to be a major subject of the discussion today. Huge game-changing event. And we've also are seeing, though, that the internet is going to also have an impact on television. We're seeing now the emergence of the second wave of the internet, which is now high bandwidth, which is allowing music and television and film to move over the internet, which is obviously a big change. And you see it now. People can watch TV on the internet as never before. And in part, this is being driven by deepening broadband penetration in the home, right? You're seeing a much greater broadband penetration. And the broadband infrastructure is being extended to mobile phones, right? So what you have is you have the beginning of this new era. For example, an early manifestation of this sort of web-based video, as you've seen it in this campaign. You've seen it with the macaca stuff in 2006. But what it really means is that what we're seeing is we're leaving the broadcast age of communications and entering an age and an arc of transition from broadcast, which is one out to many, to one that's going inevitably towards a more one-to-one, highly segmented, highly targeted 21st century media environment. And that what we're going to be talking about today is where we are in that arc when it comes to TV, right? About how TV itself is changing with some of the leading thinkers about this. And so our basic argument here is that when you think, for those of us in politics who are obsessed with television, as you have to be, you need to think about how TV is no longer that thing up in the upper left, but it's becoming video TV, whatever we're going to call it, is being liberated from the monopoly distribution of broadcast TV, right? That's part of what's happening, is that it now is being unleashed to all of us in different ways, and that it's now going to be accessible in very different ways, in different forms, and it's going to require a tremendous amount of experimentation in this century, in this decade, in the way that we did in the 60s and 70s to understand it. To drill down on one final thing, because we're not going to cover this today, the major thing we've been arguing for 3 years has been about this rise of cable. And amazingly in politics, and I won't go through all of it, in 2000, the quick statistic was in 2004, for every $4 spent on cable in the real world, in the commercial world, $5 was spent on broadcast. In politics, it was 18 to 1. It means that essentially in the commercial advertising world, there was as much money being spent on cable advertising as broadcast, with a little bit of difference. In politics, we essentially were not using cable at all. It was an incredible, it was an incredible lack of a powerful new tool that was not being used effectively. And I just want to show one very graphic symbol about why this is so important for people in this business, right? And there are people here today who control large budgets who are going to be making decisions on these things. This is California 11, which was a congressional district highly contested in the 2006 elections. And in the old model of buying broadcast, you had two choices to reach into that district. You had San Francisco and Sacramento, right? So let's see what you would do if you bought San Francisco to get into that district, right? You would be wasting 90 cents on the dollar off the top. That means that poor candidate who was out there spending 6 hours a day, raising money every day, 90% of all that money was immediately wasted, knowingly wasted, by the media consultants and the media buyers when they bought those ads as recently as 2006. And so you say, well, God, that sucks. Can't we do a better job than that? Well, let's see what Sacramento gets you. Well, Sacramento's worse, right? 96% waste. And what this means is that this was habitual, common in how we did everything. And it's our estimate that half of all money spent on television and politics today is knowingly wasted by the media consultants and the media buyers. And that there simply has to be a better way. Because we cannot, at a strategic level, knowingly be wasting 50, 60, 70% on the dollar when there are now lots of alternatives to reach things more effectively. So what didn't exist 6 years ago was this ability for you to buy cable that was, let's say, not 100% in California 11, but let's say 80% and so you had a 20% waste and bleed as opposed to a 90%. That wasn't available. And so one of our big recommendations has been to buy cable. And to make sure that as you are looking at your media offerings and TV, to make sure you're effectively using this powerful new tool of cable. And so just to end with, and I won't go through it all, and just to get into the session today, is that what we're not going to be talking about is cable today too much. We're going to be talking now really about the next generation of what's going to be coming with television. And we have an amazing panel. And let me just introduce everybody and we'll get right into it. I want to make sure I get everybody's bios right. And Todd, I've talked to you, but how do you pronounce your last name?
Juenger.
Juenger, okay. All right, we're going to go in order. I'm going to do it first, and then we'll just get right into it. First, we're going to have Todd Juenger, who is the Vice President and General Manager of Audience Research and Measurement at TiVo, obviously a thing that many of us have important relationships with in our lives. He leads TiVo's audience research and measurement business, which provides advertisers, brand groups, and programmers with detailed insight into how TiVo viewers consume and interact with television programming and advertisements. Todd led the development of Stopwatch, the only rating service to provide program and specific commercial ratings on both a live and time-shifted basis. He also oversees TiVo's internal market research and market testing activities. Tara Walpert, who I've gotten to know over the last few years through some mutual friends, is the president of Visible World. She's an acknowledged thought leader in the areas of media, marketing, and client services. She comes to Visible World from McKinsey & Company, where our mutual friend Luis Ubinas introduced us recently. She was an associate partner and leader of the firm's global media and entertainment and sales and marketing practice, and over the last decade, Tara has helped a wide range of industry leaders in television, print, direct mail, and new media, and retail to develop and implement new approaches to sales, marketing, and CRM based on both traditional capabilities and recent technology-enabled innovations. A lot of big words there, Tara. Tara has an AB in economics from Harvard and an MBA from the Harvard Business School. Our third guest today is somebody who, in some ways, for any political junkie, doesn't need any introduction at all, because he may be the single most quoted person on media in politics. But Evan Tracey, who's the COO of TNSMI CMAG and is the founder and chief operating officer of Campaign Media Analysis Group. The Campaign Media Analysis Group is the leading custom media research company for politics and public affairs, advertising, expenditure data, and I could go through the list of everything else, but I won't, because everybody knows that Evan is probably the single source for all information. Really, it's amazing, actually, how you guys have created kind of a monopoly on this, on interpreting what's happening with media spending in politics, and certainly somebody we all look to really understand what's happening out there. So welcome, the three of you, and Todd, take it away. And let me give you this. And you can walk if you choose.
Actually, we'll see about that. I actually completed the Boston Marathon on Monday, so I'm not walking as well as I usually do. Every time I have the chance to come to one of these things, I find myself humbled by the company I'm put with, and today is no exception. So I will try and be efficient with my time so I don't rob it from this great group we have up here. So as I was thinking about a little set of slides today, and I'm not sure, I guess I'm going to stand for this so I can, because I got a lot of turning to do. So I put up there this title, DVRs Change Everything, and I don't know, it just occurred to me this morning that there's so much talk this election cycle going around about change, right? So, and not just one candidate in particular, but in general, it's a big theme, right? But there's all this talk about change, it just stumbled into my mind, it's a little ironic that in the midst of all this talk about change, the way in which that message is getting delivered is being radically changed. And I'm not sure anybody is really talking about that change. So we'll talk about that a little bit today. But spreading a message and communicating with your constituents, audience, targets is radically different today than it was even a few years ago. So let's see if I can get this sucker to... That's not it? All right. So a couple points I was going to cover. So I have the luckiest job in the world, I think. I work at TiVo. We'll talk a little bit about TiVo. But not only do I work at TiVo, I'm the guy who gets to pull back all the viewing information that we're able to collect within a very strict privacy policy, I might add. So I don't, it's all disguised and masked. I don't know anything about any individuals. But on an aggregate basis, I get to play around on a daily basis and see what people are watching and not watching. And I can't imagine a more fun way to spend my life. We'll talk about what DVR as a phenomenon is. That leads to time shifting and fast forwarding of the way people consume video content, which is a big deal and creates a big communications challenge. Just so you have a sense, how many people in the room have DVRs in their home? TiVos? All right, so that's most of the room, right? So television is changing forever. Are you prepared? I didn't create this little graphic, and I'm not so fond of it, but what you see is DVRs piled up on top of each other. You talk to anybody who is in the business of forecasting the proliferation of this technology, and they all come up that it's a big number. Today, somewhere in 2008, you see 30 million I think that was an end-of-year projection. We're close to that number already, so it's probably a little bit under. So it's about a third of the households, not quite, have DVRs already. Most people believe that'll be 50 or 60 million households by the end of the decade. So that's a lot of households, but more importantly, I would think for this audience, certainly for most of my private sector clients, is that's a lot of households, and they happen to be probably your most important households. They tend to be somewhat higher income, more educated, they skew a little more urban. It's not on the slide, but I'll also tell you they over-index in consumption of every other type of media. So not only do they watch a lot of TV, they control it with their DVR, they consume more newspapers, they consume more magazines, they consume more radio than any of your other consumers. So in these households that have this device, these are very important households, so they're not just randomly scattered. And what happens when you have a DVR, which you all know because you all have DVRs, is you start watching a lot of programs on your own time. You take control of the television schedule. And we call that time shifting. Right? So how much of that? And I bet you if I polled the room, a lot of you would say, I never watch live TV anymore. And I'm sure a lot of you would say, I never watch a commercial anymore. I hear that all the time. And that may be true for you. I'm not going to call you a liar, but I will tell you that it's not entirely true across our population, but it is a major effect on how people consume TV. So for instance, and there's not many numbers in this presentation, but here's just a couple to keep in your head. For the TiVo universe, about half of their viewing in prime time on broadcast networks is time shifted. Okay? So that means half of it still occurs live when the network says you're supposed to watch it. But at least half of it happens on some other time. And I have to tell you that the more popular the program, the more as a percentage of it is time shifted. So the biggest shows on TiVo, for instance, Grey's Anatomy, #1 show on TiVo, we often see 75 or 80% of that viewing on a time shifted basis. And why is that important? Because once you start time shifting, you start fast forwarding, or you have the ability to fast forward. Right? And what do you fast forward through? You fast forward through commercials. And again, if I took a poll, I bet you a lot would say, I haven't watched a commercial in 2 years. It's not quite that bad on an overall basis, but it's not too far away from that. Once you get into time-shifted viewing, our data says that, call it 2/3, up to 70% of commercials are fast-forwarded through. So you start doing that math, that's a whole hell of a lot of money that people are spending on commercials that are getting zapped right through by these very influential and important households in the most expensive media that you're buying. So that's obviously a big deal for my private sector clients who are trying to move their brands. It's obviously very important to everybody in this room as well. So how do I know all this? And this is the only slide about it. So TiVo is a beloved brand. We sell DVRs. Hopefully some of those who raised your hands have DVRs. Hopefully some of you actually have TiVos, the real thing. I'm sure some of you don't. But a byproduct of that service is we get a lot of data back from it. Again, very strict privacy policy in place on top of that. But we can take that data, and it's very granular because it comes second by second. And we can match that up with commercials that run. And we have all this, we also know whether it's live or time shifted. And you can imagine, you take all that data together, and you can find out what people are watching. So that's how I know all this stuff. And this is what viewership actually looks like. And we're not going to, there's no particular significance of this particular program. This happens to be a Grey's Anatomy episode. And just think of that as time going across there, and notice how people watch. So this top line is people watching in live, the old-fashioned way of TV. All these people down here are watching on a time-shifted mode. And I suspect this is a pretty highly educated room. You could guess where the commercial breaks were, right? There's a lot of money spent on those commercials that most of the people fast-forwarded through. So sort of the takeaway at this point for you is DVRs are in a lot of households, really important households, and when they're in a household, a lot of your communications dollars are effectively wasted. So from this point on, the last couple of slides I have start to deal with what most of my clients are trying to wrestle with is, okay, I know that. There's nothing I can do about it. Now the question is, I also know that not every commercial is fast-forwarded. So the major part of my business is helping agencies and brands and networks understand what are the factors that influence how likely it is that somebody will watch a commercial versus not watching a commercial. Because it's not a binary equation. it's not, you don't have households that just fast forward through everything and other households who just watch everything. People are making choices on what they want to watch and what they don't want to watch. And there's a lot of factors that determine that. So if you're spending all this money on media, it's obviously very important to try and get as much viewership as you can for a number of reasons. One, because you want those impressions in the eyeballs. The other is, if you get all that right, that means your message is probably pretty persuasive because it's something that people have chosen to watch. So how do we figure out whether an ad is going to get watched or not? There's really two macro inputs to that. One is environment and one is creative. I started with environment here because the first thing people usually ask me in my job is, how do you create a TiVo-proof commercial? I bet it's when you have a movie star and there's really good music. And everybody jumps to this idea of it's all about how good the commercial is. And they're right, that is very important. But it actually is not the most important thing. What's more important is what environment did you run the commercial in? Sort of dominates it. And depending on which network you put your ad on, which day part you run it in, what kind of genre you're running in, what pod position, and that's a little, I don't want to get too technical here, but you probably all know what all that means, can have a dominant impact on the likelihood that somebody's going to fast forward you through a commercial or not. Time is short, and I didn't want to get too far below this, but even within networks and with specific programs, certain programs get time shifted and fast forward a lot more than other programs, and certain ads in certain programs are responded to differently by audiences than other ads in certain programs. So environment is very important. Media schedule is a dominant determinant. I will say, we're not here to talk about cable, but one thing, and you'll see this a little more later, it is a truism that there's less fast forwarding in general on cable than there is on broadcast. So it supports some of the theories that Simon's group has been espousing for a while. Creative does matter. The ad creative is important. Some ads work better than others. It's not just the ad in isolation, though. Some ads can work horribly on one program and work very well in another program. It's sort of how they tie together. And it is not always the sexy ads that win, surprisingly. Sometimes it is. Movie trailers do very well. Pharmaceuticals do very well. Why the heck do pharmaceuticals do very well? The answer is not because they're particularly sexy ads. The theory is that if you suffer from a condition and there's an advertisement for some treatment that claims to help your condition, you're probably going to pay attention to it. Right? Direct response ads perform well. This is often considered sort of the bottom feeding of advertising. This is 1-800 call to buy a Bowflex. But again, the theory here, there's one thing, they run in media environments that tend to be less fast-forwarded, but the other is if you're thinking about buying a Bowflex, you're probably going to watch the ad, and you may watch it multiple times. So it's not always straight on the intuition of what you think might win. So I got 3 more slides. They're just some examples to show you how variable this can be. So this is sort of old data, and I know it's sort of hard to read, but I brought this slide anyway because I love this slide. It's very fascinating to me. So we looked at, this is last April, so it is old data, but the point remains the same. We looked for the highest rated commercials among time-shifted viewing. So we took all viewing and said, okay, let's not pay attention to live. Let's only look at people that were watching on a time-shifted basis, which means at the touch of a button, they could fast forward through any ad they want to. So we leveled the playing field. Let's look at the commercials, the single commercial airings that got the highest rating during the month, it was last April, and there they are. So you can see DreamWorks commercial for the movie Disturbia was the highest, and then GMC trucks, and you can see what programs they ran on. So fair enough. Now what's interesting to me is you would think, wouldn't you, that the highest rated commercials would appear in the highest rated programs. It turns out that's not even close to true. So the highest rated program on a time-shifted basis for the month of April was the Grey's Anatomy that ran on April 26. In that program, there were probably about 40 advertisements. Only 2 out of those 48 advertisements made the list of the 10 highest commercials, and they were number 8 and number 10 on the list. All other of these 8 commercials on the highest list ran in programs that don't even show up on the top 10 list. Just pointing out that it's not some binary function. There were a heck of a lot of people watching that Grey's Anatomy, and they paid attention to those 2 movie trailer ads, and they fast-forwarded everything else. So you can't make the assumption that I know I want to reach a lot of eyeballs in this new world of DVRs, so what I'm going to do is what I've always done. I'm going to buy the programs with the biggest reach. Here's another example. This shows that the media environment can make a big difference on advertising performance. So this was an advertisement, a real one, that ran in February for a particular quick service restaurant. I won't say which one. And you might say, well, was this ad good or bad? So it ran a pretty heavy schedule. It ran in the show CSI New York, an original episode that ran on CBS in prime time, and 67% of the viewers fast-forwarded it. So you say, probably not that good of an ad because, look, that's a pretty high fast-forward rate. That same ad ran in another CSI New York that was a rerun that ran on cable, and only 40% of the people fast-forwarded it. Environment matters. That same ad ran in the Colbert Report. I don't know how people in this room feel about that show. I think it's kind of funny that I found this example. And only 29% of the people fast-forward it. Is it a good ad or not? The answer is it depends on what environment it's running in, what the audience is of that show. And if you're the media planner or the brand manager for this brand, this has profound implications for where you probably want to spend your money. Last slide. Same point turned on its head. This says, within one program, there's a high variability in how much the people watch the ads. So this was an episode of House that ran last year, and I hear sometimes people say, well, people either fast forward or they don't. So, in this episode of House, every commercial is going to have more or less the same rating. Couldn't be farther from the truth. So there's about 40 ads that ran in House. On average, on a time-shifted basis, the ad got a 4.7 rating. But there was an ad in the show that got a 7.3 rating, and there was another ad in the show that got a 3.2 rating, almost 2.5 times difference, showing you again that people are voting with their remotes and deciding which ads they want to watch or not. Last slide. I know I'm out of time, the common thought is this is all well and good and scary, but what the hell do I do about it? People have DVRs, or they're fast forwarding through ads. Is it just game over? The answer is, of course, it's not game over. When we work with clients, this is what they're in the rest of doing. First is you got to know what's going on. So that's why I have a business. We sell this information, and if you don't understand this as a person who spends media money, you're likely to be wasting a lot of money. So first you just have to know what the facts are. And then within knowing what the facts are, you can do some things within your normal TV planning without radically changing anything else. That just moves some money around to really improve your delivery of the message you're trying to get out, and that can be changing media schedule or creative or the combinations of those things. And then the final point is, as this proliferates, it does, I believe, increase the pressure to find alternatives, ways to reach those households that you're missing. Those 50 million households who have DVRs are going to be fast forwarding through your commercials, no matter how smart you get about optimizing it. You may still get through to them sometimes, but the frequency and the reach is not going to be anything like it used to be, and it's going to be much more expensive. So how else can you get into those DVR households? One way is TiVo has a whole business around providing new ways of advertising on the DVR, and I'm not even here to talk about that, but that's one way. There are other forms of video. Tara's going to talk about targeting ads, which is another great way to improve how much your ad gets viewed, because if it's relevant, it's more likely to be seen. And finally, over time, people are probably going to move some money out of TV, or at least into different forms of TV, because no matter how smart you get about this, you're still going to not be able to reach the DVR households like you used to. That's it.
Todd,
sorry I went over 2 minutes.
Let me say, as Tara is loading up, let me just say that, just to use a statistic that we use in our presentation, is that somewhere in this election cycle in 2008, somewhere between 1/4 and 40% of all voters will have DVRs, depending on the skew and demographic skew and everything, which means that somewhere on, a good rule of thumb number will be 1/3 of all voters will be frequently skipping all political commercials.
The demo.
So if you want to understand the impact of this and how fast this has happened, because DVR penetration was only 9% 2 years ago, this is a completely different environment than the 2004 election or even the 2006 election, because of the explosion of DVRs. And so just this one new development has radically altered the way we have to be thinking about television advertising and how we're going to be reaching target audiences in politics and in advocacy. And Tara Walpert's now going to be talking, and what she's going to be talking a little bit about some additional strategies and new tools we have to be able to reach people in this more challenging environment. Welcome, Tara.
Thank you, Simon. It's an honor to be here and among this panel. And thank you, Todd. That was interesting. And actually ties, frankly, very, very strongly into what we're going to talk about. Raise your hand if you've heard of Visible World. All right, that's one more person in the audience than I would have expected. Raise your hand if you've heard of DoubleClick. About half. Okay. For those of you who know what DoubleClick does, you can think of Visible World a little bit like a DoubleClick for TV or a DoubleClick for video. For those of you who don't, what we do is we basically take all of the capabilities that advertisers love about the internet. The fact that the advertising is targeted, the fact that it's flexible, the fact that you can dynamically customize your message, and we bring those into TV commercials. So the biggest thing that we say is all of you have spent a ton of time focusing on the media and which programs and which GRPs and so on and so forth. In television, it's actually less often about the message, right? It's all about the eyeballs. And frankly, actually, the political vertical has done a much better job in the old world than most of my commercial clients in thinking about multiple messages and where the messages need to go and how they need to be constructed, right? You guys probably have a ton of folks who manually create and distribute and rush to get out new messages and more targeted messages to the best that you can within the infrastructure that exists in television. Most of our commercial clients, prior to working with Visible World, didn't. They had a couple, right? Maybe if they're super aggressive, they had 2 or 3. But in a television environment that looks like what Simon described, where it's getting much more fragmented, as Todd said, you're facing the risk of time shifting in a lot of your media, it puts that much more emphasis on having a message that is relevant and engaging and fresh. And what we've found, and what a lot of the research has said, is consumers don't hate commercials. They hate irrelevant commercials. And so what that means is advertisers, and we think politics, needs a way to easily and cost-effectively for you get multiple messages out at the right time. And that's what we do. The easiest way to explain what we do is to show you an example. At the end of the day, what we're doing is we're taking, rather than having a flat 30-second spot that runs the same way everywhere, we've created something we've called IntelliSpot technology. It stands for Intelligent Spot. You can tell we're technologists and not marketers. But what it does is it enables you to basically swap copy or edit your copy on the fly so that you're getting the right message out in the right place at the right time. And so I'll give you an example. This is a campaign that was done actually several years ago. It just speaks well to what we're talking about for United Airlines when they were launching TED. So they were launching a new airline. It was all about personalization. We saw the CMO, coincidentally, 8 days before the campaign was set to go to air. And one of the things we said to him was, wow, if you think about it, particularly if you're using local cable in your media plan, which he was, you can get all the way down to the neighborhood. And based on what you know about customers who live in that neighborhood, and frankly just acknowledging that they live there, you can really make something of this personalization that you're trying to build into the brand. So 8 days, they spent $200,000 on media in Chicago and an additional $10,000 on production to make this work, and I'll show you what they did. They picked 2 destinations, Florida and Vegas, that were tied to different demographics that had existed in the different zones that they wanted to highlight in the various commercials. And then if you click on location, we'll start with the Florida one. Anybody here from Chicago? All right, you want to pick a neighborhood for this to run in?
Let's go with Joliet.
Joliet, okay.
Joliet has its own gambling, so.
Perfect, all right, so that's good. They wouldn't want to go to Vegas, they'd be wanting to go to Florida. And if you create the ad, what you'll see it do is the process of, it's kind of like mail merge for video. It's picking out the right pieces of the creative and stitching them together in a way that is sufficiently seamless that you would never know it wasn't made on Madison Avenue. That part didn't play as well with the test audience. All right, I'm going to show you a quick contrast in some of the other areas. They missed the prison part, but in some of the other areas where they were younger, they were advertising the route to Vegas. Do you just click on destination? And we'll pick another Chicago area.
Talk about town
We do not.
or Gold Coast.
Gold Coast, perfect. And what you'll notice is they've changed just a couple of things, but it really changes the feel of the ad. They went ahead and changed the music, they've changed the text, and they're now calling out the specific geographic area. All right, so right off, it's a little bit more lively. Okay, so that campaign for a new product generated 70% awareness in Chicago. The comps in the broadcast markets that were running just the same generic ad, 30%. And so when you think about making the most of your media dollars, that kind of investment in targeting makes a huge difference. And candidly, we've had commercial clients who've been running these kinds of campaigns for a couple of years now. We really haven't done a heck of a lot with the political vertical, which is partially, frankly, our issue in that we've been a small company with small resources, and also the fact that this has not been an area that has been as aggressively pursued to date. You want to go? Oh, I actually have the option to control it myself. Love it. So Simon alluded to it earlier. If you think about, and I know you guys do this today, right? It's not just red and blue states. It's actually little pockets within each of these areas that have very distinct customer bases or constituents who care about very particular issues. And I don't know if anyone saw, the Journal actually published a book review earlier this week on a book that's talking about the fact that essentially if you look at little geographic clusters, not surprisingly you find a lot of like-minded individuals. But the challenge is, and frankly these are the present realities of political advertising, it could really be put your vertical in here, it's the realities of everyone's TV advertising, is that the cost and the time and the human effort that has been historically required to have more targeted messages or more freshly updated messages has just been incredibly painful. And that's why, as I said, you guys have frankly done it better than a lot of other folks who haven't been willing to spend the money. But the result is it's still often either incredibly painful to pull off a change, or you're going for the lowest common denominator across the broadest base of eyeballs that you've got, which in today's environment means you're more likely to get skipped, you're more likely to have your spend wasted, and it makes the efficacy lower. So if you think about targeted messaging, our capabilities work across all of the media platforms, all the way from network television, all the way down to, I know it was referred to by some of the work that Simon's group did about a year ago. There are now trials going on for actual set-top box household-specific advertising, and a lot of our clients, frankly, are working in the existing media plan, both for the immediate benefit, but also to get ready for that true one-to-one communication. For this, I wanted to focus in very specific, the difference across these media is frankly just the degree of geo-targeting that you can get down to, right? So in any of these media, you can have constantly updating commercials based on almost any data feed or data-driven condition, but if you want to get local, if you want to get granular geographically, then you need to really be working within local television or frankly, most particularly local cable. So those were a couple of the areas that I was going to highlight just as you think through where might the opportunity be. And again, you guys are the experts here, well above and beyond what we do, but I laid out, based on what we've seen some of our commercial clients do very successfully, a couple of ideas that are intended just to start you thinking about where this might take place. We work in particular, when we work in local cable, with a lot of retailers and financial services companies who are looking at what are the specific types of customers in that particular zone and what kind of interests do they have. And we have actually had a couple of political campaigns, I won't name them, who have taken advantage of the capability to hone in on very particular issues that they've seen occurring in that area, whether it's a plant that was going to be torn down, whether it was taxes, whatever the issue is. If you think about having any kind of consistent message that can be variable with a piece within it in terms of, let's say it's the, I'm the experienced candidate. Okay, I'm the experienced candidate can have a common theme throughout a whole set of commercials where the actual issue that's being highlighted to make that point varies. And it can vary based geographically, or it can vary based on what someone commented on in the newspaper in the morning. Similarly, if you think about localization, Walmart, for example, has been very public about a big effort they've been making to have their commercials tie in more locally to the community service efforts they're running and the communities that they're trying to target. And they've been extremely successful with bringing in actual footage from the local schools, the local sponsors, other folks that they've found get it stopped on a TiVo or make someone actually talk about the commercial the next day. To me, this seems like an obvious example where whether it's local endorsements, or taking advantage of local celebrities, it's a way to make the message resonate a little bit more strongly and particularly be remembered the next day. And then lastly, and this doesn't really have to be local, it could be anywhere, but it could also incorporate some of the very particular zip code-based or zone-based elements. The speed factor, right? We hear often from the folks that we do work with on political campaigns that that's one of the biggest pain points, is just making sure you can turn the content fast enough. That's one of the things we help folks do best. We can take time out of the existing process. We can certainly make it a lot easier. And frankly, with the pace at which everything's moving today, not just politics, but everything that affects politics, the business, the environment, consumer confidence, having the ability to make these things change as dynamically as you would if you were running a text ad on the internet makes a ton of sense. We always tell our clients, crawl, walk, run. If you look on the internet, what Google and the others will tell you is that to optimize a campaign, it typically takes somewhere on the order of 200, 250 versions. Most of our clients don't do that. They're running campaigns that have within them probably anywhere from 35 to 50 versions. They started out typically with a campaign that just had a couple of different dynamic elements. But the result is that you can have something that has a very consistent brand message or theme, but has hooks in it that are likely to pull in more viewers and make your message much more memorable. And in a world where, as Simon was saying at the start, your candidate's been out day in and day out trying to raise the funds. In addition to making sure that the media buy is optimized, you really want to make sure that the message is optimized as well, and that's what we'd love to help do. Thank you.
Thanks, Thanks, Tara. And I think that, just reflecting on this, what's interesting is even just thinking about the Pennsylvania primary that just passed on Tuesday. Both campaigns spend millions of dollars, the Democratic campaigns, and using your system, each of them could have had, instead of it saying in Pennsylvania at the end, because I saw some of the ads, it could have had the local places in each of the ads for their creating greater emotional connectivity, right? And you didn't get into the technology of how you do that on the cable head-in, as it's called, but it allows, in a place like Pennsylvania, you could have 30, 40, 50 different localized spots to create greater localization, greater connectivity. So this is not really a pie-in-the-sky kind of, ooh, that's not for me, right, kind of thing.
No, we're running today about 200 campaigns weekly for different advertisers. We have been involved in some of the governor campaigns to date, and frankly, I didn't want to review that in hindsight, but frankly, Pennsylvania is a perfect example where you can see it. Spend, A, doesn't always determine the entire difference, and B, when you've got a place where the constituents have so clearly got different interests and likely different reactions to some of the things that the candidates have been using against each other in the press, someone who's able to take advantage of that to make the message a bit more targeted is going to have a bigger impact.
Great, thank you. And now the guy is going to tell us what's actually going on, not what's possible, but what is actually happening in this cycle. Evan Tracey. Welcome.
Yeah, it's sort of a funny way to do this, to sort of see the future first and then talk about the present. As Simon mentioned, we are the arbiters right now of political advertising spending. We've been at this since about 1997, as I'm sort of fond of saying. Front row seats are great unless it's political ads or sumo wrestling. So what we do is really service clients three ways. We provide them basically in-campaign real-time analysis of where ads are running, what ads look like. We push new creative to the clients, but we also do a lot of ad hoc research, everything from retrieving creative to doing custom reporting and custom requests. We're part of TNS. Our coverage for politics right now is pretty much limited to the stodgy old broadcast media, where we're right now in about 132 of 210 markets. We'll be up to all the markets by the end of this year. We are covering in every state, and we do national cable, but not local cable. Cover inside Beltway print, mostly opinion leader. We do some internet. We're starting to do things like tracking blogs and even research on things like media habits. Basically what I want to do today is just briefly kind of run through our forecast of the 2008 elections, talk about some of the changes to the political marketplace, talk about some of our forecast and where these dollars are going to come, a little bit about timing. I think it's at least a state law or a district law, but maybe it's federal law now that if you have media in your title and you're talking to more than 10 people, you have to mention the internet. So I'll spend just a couple of seconds on that, and then just a few thoughts of where we're going to go from there. First, the political marketplace. Again, it's very unique, and people that deal with real advertisers, I'm sure, learn this the hard way, that there's really nothing quite like the way political spends its money on advertising. It's a 4-year business cycle where no 2 years, no 2 consecutive years are alike. So in other words, your year 1 is your off year coming out of a presidential, and your year 4 is usually a presidential, and you've got midterm elections wedged in there in the middle. There's been incredible upward growth in ad spending. A lot of this is due to the fact that now you have multiple moving pieces in every campaign between parties and issue groups, and even traditional advertisers are weighing in now. Changes to the campaign finance law, the McCain-Feingold bill, in essence doubled the amount of money that campaigns have available to them. That money went immediately to what was already the biggest line item in their budget, which was television advertising. And then we see more campaigns using TV, and I think that's being mostly driven by decreasing in editing costs. In other words, literally the McCain campaign was making their TV commercials on a laptop. So when a presidential campaign is doing advertising, not in a high-cost production studio, you can see that the door is pretty much open to anybody running for office now to produce spots. And then finally, it's events-driven. I mean, by events, I mean obviously elections, but obviously things that happen during elections tend to impact ad spending. The best example of that is when Joe Lieberman lost his primary in Connecticut. You saw some of the safest members of Congress ramping up their TV buys almost within the next week. I think the idea being if Joe Lieberman could lose, anybody could have lost in 2006. As you'll see, the growth in ad spending has gone from just around $1 billion in 2002 to over 2.6 billion in 2006. Why is that? Well, we talked about sort of all the challenges right now into running commercials. The best analogy I can give is what has happened to political advertising and political communication is basically the same approach that Americans take when we go overseas to foreign countries that don't speak English, and we run into people that don't speak our language. Our first instinct is to always talk louder. We say, "Do you know where the bathroom is?" Like somehow they'll understand it better. So, that's in essence what's happened to political advertising is their answer to the fact that it's always going to be a one day of sale business. There's not a situation where you can evaluate quarter over quarter, because once you win or lose an election, you're either moving on to your next election or you're looking for your next job. So a lot of this is just driven by the fact that they've got to get the message out, and they've got to do it in a finite amount of time. And winning and losing is more important than how much waste there is. A lot of the strategy has been about rerunning the last campaign adjusted for inflation. In other words, what you see campaigns do is they go and they dust off the playbook from the last election. They pull the media schedule out a couple more weeks and they add 20% to it, and that's their campaign strategy. They still view TV as the best megaphone to drive independent voters. And as you can see by comparison in 2006 to the 2.6 billion that we saw, these aren't necessarily apples to apples because we don't track local cable, so we're really estimating that. Some of that 2.6 billion includes things like public affairs advertising that's got election nuance related. So it's not necessarily apples to apples, but as you can see, broadcast TV has been the weapon of choice. I use this graph just because it shows the insanity of how campaigns spend their money. If you look at the access, it's the amount of money spent versus the available voters. In other words, by looking at that chart, basically campaigns spend the most money when they have the least amount of people to influence or least amount of customers to get. There's no other business in the world that I think spends their money like that. If you look at our forecast for 2008, we're looking at a $3 billion election for TV ads. We're currently at 13% and climbing at a record pace, thank you. What's driving the spending is the historic presidential race we've had, both the candidates, the process, and the money they're raising. There's a very competitive state and federal race backdrop underneath the presidential race. In other words, we're picking up pretty much where we left off with House and Senate races in 2006, as well as a number of things going on at the state level that are also driving spending. There's a lot of money on the sidelines right now waiting to come in the form of interest groups, and you're looking at $300 to $400 million additional to that $3 billion that'll be spent in advocacy advertising related to public policy and legislation. Where we stand now is the first number there is our forecast for the year, that what will get spent combined by candidates and what has been spent already. As you can see, the $108 million has been spent on basically on broadcast television since January of 2008. Parties have only kicked in $106,000, but that's about to change. And group spending is right now at about $18 million. If you look at the presidential primary process in total, we're over $231 million spent on TV ads for that process right now. With all apologies to Duncan Hunter, who actually started his advertising in December of 2006, this began in earnest in February of 2007. Democratic candidates have combined to spend over $130 million. That number looks really big when put next to what Republican candidates spend, which is a combined $58 million. Majority of spending by groups right now has been in the promotion of issues and not going directly after candidates. So things like AARP's Divided We Fail, League of Conservation Voters, there's a number of groups that have been promoting their issues in the context of the ongoing election. That's probably about to change as well. And then ad spending, again, because of the sort of quirky calendar that was put together and the sort of emphasis on being an early winner and getting the nomination wrapped up quickly, and we all saw how well that's working right now, is close to $90 million of that $231 million was spent between the states of Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina. If you break down the individual candidates so far, Barack Obama has spent close to $70 million on TV ads alone. He's outspent Senator Clinton in 38 out of 44 states thus far. And of late, 41% of his advertising expenditures in a dollar form have been going into the primetime day part, which is the most expensive television that you can buy, generally not something that political campaigns go near just because of the cost factor. His strategy has been to go on first, focus the majority of his ad money has gone into the largest population centers in each state. He's used some local and national surrogates in his ads, and he's been using a lot of niche media to fortify within different demographics, especially with things like cable, and especially things like radio, where he's actually bought a lot of radio where he uses very young voice talent. Hillary Clinton, on the other hand, has spent $42 million on TV. Her spending has been heaviest in the must-win states, and she's the first to use negative spots in this election. We'd be remiss not to mention John McCain, because if we handed out awards at CMAG, we would probably have to give him the ROI of the century, spending $10 million to get his party's nomination. Essentially an all-in strategy in New Hampshire, which rode the momentum, where actually the primary calendar actually worked for his campaign. And his strategy has been very disciplined. He's used very few messages in the ads that he uses. He plays over and over and over. Just to talk a little bit more, right now as far as others in this race, not a lost reference, but we know that Mayor Bloomberg is at least not running at the top of any ticket. We know that Nader is in. I'm sure we'll see others. Groups right now is combined to spend over $50 million in the primary, but if you add up the pledges that you read in the paper, that number is right now somewhere in the $700 million for liberal and conservative groups that are ready to engage this race when we get there. If you look at House and Senate races right now, again, we're looking at this to be somewhere in the $200 to $250 million all said and done. We're very early in the process. As you can see, only $3.3 million by candidates so far. In the House, it's a little higher, 13.3 due to primaries and retirements. But again, when you're looking at politics, and we've gone down and broken out about the last 6 elections, you're literally looking at about 60% of the total ad money flowing through in probably the last 65 to 70 days. So as you can see, we're still tracking there. The Senate, because it is a sea of red, it is not a good map for Republicans. Could impact some of the ways that advertising money gets spent in Senate races. The House, obviously, you're looking at a historic number of competitive seats, and retirements are adding primaries at this point. State and local governors, as you can see, there's not many this year, about 11. We suspect that to be somewhere in the $100 million range. The one thing I would point attention to is where you're going to see a lot of spending, and we probably at this point have underestimated, is in ballot measures. California alone, we saw over $100 million spent in February. One of the unintended consequences of this quirky primary schedule was that a lot of states did not move their state and local primaries. They just moved their presidential primaries up. So in states like California and others, you're literally looking at 3 waves of statewide elections. So California, which has become very fond of recalls and ballot measures, are likely going to push us past that $230 million number. Again, as I covered in just the talking points there, on the issue side, we're obviously energy, environment, telecom, and healthcare have been some of the most active areas for issue ad spending thus far. Now, again, as promised, I have to talk about at least the new media in the context of internet advertising and just a few of the observations that we've seen there. It's been, by and large, used mostly by the top-tier presidential campaigns. Now, obviously, there's a lot going on sort of below our radar screen, so I would preface at that. We track, again, about 3,000 of the most trafficked sites. A lot of the internet stuff is going to much more localized blogs. Most of the messages are designed around fundraising and grassroots. We calculate no more than $4 million has been spent on internet advertising at this point. And most of the sites that are being local are top news sites, both local and national, many ideology-driven sites, some that match up with specific demographics, sports and election-related advertising. In politics, and especially in political strategy, perception is reality. So the perception that is created off of this election will dictate likely where you'll see the new medias accelerate into the next elections. So far, there have been a few very highly publicized mistakes with online advertising. I would just sort of pay attention to those as you go along in the news, because that's the thing that the, sort of the consultants will use in their next round of elections to discourage things like this kind of internet advertising. Again, some of the events that we're going to watch just down the stretch, which will impact sort of timing and ad spending, is just, will anybody actually win the Democratic race? If so, when will they secure a nomination, why and how? That's going to obviously have a lot to do with when ad spending takes place. If the Democratic race does go to the convention, I would argue at this point that you may be seeing a significant lull in fundraising and spending during the summer months. That may trickle down into other races as well. General election ads, they have begun. I mean, the DNC has started ads that target McCain. Obviously, McCain has started to run a few ads, but the dollars are very insignificant, and there is no sort of geographic rhyme or reason to these. I suspect things like national cable may be well positioned when the candidates start advertising to superdelegates. The battleground, again, it's very much up in flux. I think it depends on who you ask, but we hear that there's going to be a different battleground if it's McCain-Obama or if it's McCain-Clinton. So again, I think it's going to be very much at the mercy of the Democratic race to figure out sort of what the actual battleground looks like as far as where most of the ad dollars are going to flow. And at this point, fundraising, again, is really the sound of one hand clapping when you compare the Democrats to the Republicans. Obviously, Senator McCain has said that he's going to go on public financing and try and basically use the party's infrastructure to carry his message. So that, again, will likely have an impact on how some of the ad money is spent and when. And then just looking ahead to 2009, it is the start of a new political business cycle. I think, again, pay very close attention to the strategies that are given the most credit and success in the high-profile races this year. I would caution to say one thing, is that I don't think Senator Obama's strategy and Senator McCain's strategy, for that matter, are strategies that can be replicated. So, I think that there'll be a lot of takeaways from what they did individually, but I think when you start looking at the next round of presidential strategies, the candidates would probably be well served to look backwards to 2004. The issues right now that are most prevalent in the advertising and the rhetoric, again, the economy, trade, healthcare, energy, and Iraq is very far down the list. We looked at, for an upcoming newsletter we're putting out, we're breaking down sort of the rhetoric on the energy issue. And close to $71 million has been spent so far by candidates talking about things like global warming, gas prices, energy shortages. By comparison, only about $22 million have been spent talking about the war in Iraq. 2010 will be a very big year for governor's races. Really, actually, this year and the next year will be because of redistricting. Governors and who control state houses will have a big role in how redistricting is done. And again, I think that's going to push a lot of outside money into governor's races. And I would argue, too, that I think there will be a lot of discussion about redoing the primary calendars going forward. So just a couple of things to look at. And at this point, I'll turn it back to Simon and to the panel here.
Thank you. Let's turn this on. We've got 20 minutes or so for questions, and I'm going to allow, just out of friendship and old times, Will Robinson is here. Will, I'm going to give you the first question. Do we have a mic and all that? Go ahead, Will. I should say that Will Robinson, for those who don't know Will, is one of the old media dinosaurs who's actually innovating and leading the way on our side. And even though we invited many of the Democratic media consultants in town, he may be one of the only ones that are actually here today. Welcome, Will. Among you, yeah, among you. Okay. Go ahead, Will.
Yeah, I'm a dinosaur with an iPod. So I have two questions. They're interrelated. I think that the ratings that you had up here kind of slipped by people. I was wondering if you guys could talk a little bit about not just the cable versus television, but just what is happening to the broadcast television audience and what has actually been happening to it just in the last 12 months. And then the second thing, I'd be interested what you guys think the impact is of the rise of satellite television and all the things we're talking about and wanting to do.
Great questions. So I'll take a stab, but I don't have the monopoly on the intelligence of this one. Excellent point on broadcast television. You're right. I didn't spend a lot of time on numbers, and this may be commonly known to some of you, but probably not most of you. If you think about Simon's graph that showed the broadcast going down and the cable going up, that probably makes an impact, but the numbers are staggering. I'll talk about the last 12 months, but just over the last 10 years. It used to be that broadcast television, a good show in prime time would deliver a 20 rating, a 30 rating.
What does that mean in English?
So what the hell's a rating? So well, actually, there's some nuanced answers to that, and somebody will probably call me on it. But the layman's definition is it's just think of it as a percentage of the households who watched a show. So if you hear somebody say that a certain show got a 20 rating, that means on average 20% of the households were watching that program. And if you hear somebody say share, that shrinks the universe and says, okay, of people who were actually watching TV, how many were watching that program? So the first one is out of all households, and at any given time, only 50% or less of people may actually be watching TV, right? So if you get a 20 rating, that's how many households you delivered, 20% of 110 million, 20x million households. But maybe only 60 million households were even watching TV at the time. So if you delivered a 20 rating, but only 60% of households were watching, then the share is actually, you got a third of the audience, which never happens anymore. But so ratings and share, those are what those terms mean. You'll hear them a lot. You don't see many double-digit ratings anymore for the biggest broadcast shows. I mean, it used to be that a broadcast network would introduce a new program in the fall, and if it didn't deliver numbers in the 20s or something, it was at risk. Now they're lucky if they get something in the high single digits. What that means is the number of people watching any one program has radically decreased. So in order to reach more people, you can't just buy MASH anymore, right? You have to spread your dollars across multiple programs. It's this fragmentation that has caused the cable audience in aggregate to pass up the broadcast because there's 500 cable stations and each one is only getting a 0.5 share or a 1 share. But if you add up that across 300 networks, it's more than 6 networks, broadcast networks, that are getting a 5 or a 10. I think that might have been the root of some of what the question addressed. In the last 12 months, it's been, so that trend has been happening for a long time. In the last 12 months, it has definitely, in my experience and from my data at least, been particularly accelerated. A lot of people think that has to do with the writer's strike, right? So there's not as much fresh content on broadcast and everything else, but the broadcast is having a horrible year. Now, part of that, however, I will caution, is because of the way that people are measuring things. So for 50 years, people have used the Nielsen ratings, basically what they call the overnight ratings, to determine how many people watched a program. Now there's DVRs in 30 million homes, as I've said. A lot of those people are time shifting. So now you look at an overnight rating and you say, oh my gosh, the sky is falling. My audience is down 20% year over year. Well, if you wait 7 days, you pick up a lot more, you get a lot of that audience back, right? So the whole way the industry thinks about processing an audience has to change, and this concept of an overnight will probably not have much more life because so much of the time shifting is going on. Satellite. So the thing about, so satellite is in 25, 30 million households, something like that? Yeah. So, and it's existed for 10, 15 years in aggregate. Satellite actually goes way past back, older than its roots, but in a commercial viable basis. The thing I'll say about satellite, and maybe somebody has a more insightful thing to say, is every satellite home, sort of by definition, has generally more channels than a cable home, usually hundreds, 400 channels or something in a satellite home, because that's part of the satellite proposition. So as that has grown, at least for TiVo ratings, again, it has fragmented the audience that much more when I look at satellite homes versus cable homes. There's a lot of cable homes who still are on what's called analog cable systems. So these people, and maybe some of you are in these systems, they're still only getting 50 or 60 channels, which is a lot more than you used to get when you got 7 channels. But compared to 500, it's nothing. So every satellite home has a lot more channels. You're not adding a lot more satellite homes these days, though. So that number.
What about local inserts?
So local inserts, is what you answered. You answer your own questions. Satellite is unable to do local inserts. So satellite, by the technology, only delivers a signal from the satellite. So this whole thing, the California example, where you had to buy San Francisco or Sacramento, or you could buy local cable, and you can, with Terra's help, target it down to a zip code or someday set-top box. Satellite can't do anything like that. So you got 30 million satellite homes where they can insert what they call local inventory, and I won't get into what that means, but it is, you cannot target it geographically because of the nature of satellite distribution. So those households have no local targeting capability. They have 500 channels. Most of them, by the way, have DVRs because most satellite providers have made DVRs standard in what they provide because that's the way they compete with video on demand, which is something cable can do and satellite cannot do. So satellite operators are handing out DVRs like Pez candy.
What percentage of homes, of households have used satellite?
So I think it's,
21 to 25%.
Yeah.
it's about half and half between Dish and DirecTV.
You guys want to add anything to that?
I think you hit on the main point.
And I think part of the takeaway on this is that one of the things we've been recommending is that in your polling and in your market research, you need to be developing a media battery at the back end of your poll to go along with the demographic battery that's become very constant in all of our polling. I mean, the way polling works in politics is there's a constant set of demographic questions. How much money do you make? How old you are? Male, female. We've been recommending for 3 years that there needs to become also a media battery at the end to go along with that, so you can track individual media usage based on your target demo to have a better sense of how to reach your demographics, particularly because, as Evan pointed out, in theory, at the end, when the fewer people are undecided, you have more ability to target, right? It doesn't really work that way in the political business, but there becomes an ability for micro-targeting or more niche targeting that is only going to be possible with greater market research over time. So part of our general recommendation is that all of this is going to mean pollsters make more money in our business. Other questions? Yes, sir.
Do you have a sense that
Microphone, just identify yourself, and you're going into permanent YouTube dustbin here for
my name's Josh Wine, I'm a reporter with Communications Daily. Cable industry is working really hard to, develop a, easier and better targeted advertising system. Do you folks have any confidence or fear that they're gonna get their act together in that regard?
Well, we work pretty closely with them on that, so we think they're going to get their act together. But no, I do think actually, it's always hard when you try to get a whole variety of companies that have done things their own way for a very long time to do things together. And certainly there is a history in the cable industry that I think actually impedes a lot of people's willingness to buy or willingness to try again, because historically there have been some things that have gone very poorly or had a lot of trouble getting off the ground. But I think if you look at the recent efforts and the recent announcement of what's euphemistically called Project Canoe, which is the cable industry effort to get together and create some common standards that make it easier for you to buy and take advantage of these targeted ads or interactive ads in some cases, there are some key differences that actually do give me more confidence, which is they've actually put real money into a common entity, which is atypical of a lot of their attempts at collaboration. B, they've actually gone ahead and named or are about to name, it is publicly rumored that there is going to be a CEO for that comes actually out of the ad business rather than out of the cable business. And from our efforts with them, I think there's a level of activity around this that is different from what they've done in the past. So whether that particular effort makes it happen or not, I think the attention that has been put on the need for common standards and collaboration is going to end up having a very positive impact on the industry. So that particular initiative, it's always hard to say, but I think you're going to see some real movement out of cable that has not been achieved in the past.
Any other? In our last cable paper, by the way, we go through and advise anyone who buys on cable sort of the challenges as well as the opportunities in our paper, because there are, as you pointed out, some challenges. And I spoke at the cable show last year to try to help all the cable folks figure out how to get more of that $3 billion that Evan was talking about, because there have historically been some impediments. But I think the cable industry is making extraordinary efforts, personally, in trying to eliminate many of them, but they've still got a long way to go.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Is anybody measuring the kind of free media or the buzz factor based on ads? Like, for example, this year, the phone call at 3 a.m. has now become part of the whole national lexicon and culture. But is there any way to really monitor that? Like, I also go back to the "Where's the Beef?" That was an incredible thing. It's still known in popular culture. Can you measure that?
Well, I mean, we've started to do some research in that area, again, very much in the early stages. The 3 a.m. ad, I mean, from scraping blogs and hearing sort of, echo factors in the blog, it's really hard to get your handle on what's real and what's somebody just posting an AP story into a blog and, leaving it there for anybody to read. And also, there's no real good geography to say, is this coming from the far left or the far right, or is this coming from people who, are usually talking about recipes and stocks. So with that as a preface, I mean, we have not found enough to say that, look, there's something that is moving the needle out there. For example, we looked very hard to see if there was an echo in the blogosphere when Barack Obama went after Exxon by name. And it was non-existent. I mean, the chatter that was there was related to sort of energy policy. So, I think there is that sort of cause and effect, and the one thing the internet has given us is sort of another, cave to listen for echoes in. But, right now, I think most of this advertising, like I said, takes place at such incredible volume. I mean, it's old Spinal Tap. I mean, it's going to 11. Is that, I think it becomes an echo chamber, and people just are sort of assuming everybody's seeing the same ads and moving on in their dialogue. And again, a lot of this is, I know in Madison Avenue, they're fond of saying that they're aware that half of all their advertising is wasted. They just don't know which half. In politics, it's probably more like 80%, and they don't care. Because if you reach that, last 5 or 6% of undecided voters on their way out to the polls, the advertising's done its job, and if you lose, it's not anything the advertising did, it's because you had a lousy candidate, so.
Maybe a couple more folks.
The question I wanted to ask, a couple of you were talking about how to try and deliver a message, it has to be more localized, and how people are becoming more individual in how they watch TV and that they can choose. I was thinking, is TV really as effective because of these trends? Is it as effective for political advertising? Are we seeing other mediums like the internet take over?
I'll just take a stab and then turn over to the expert here. I mean, I think that in general, the direction we're going is that kind of what you see in the automotive industry is where TV pushes the brand, the internet sells the model. I suspect that what you're going to see is politicians and political advertising specialists that really understand what their goal is here are going to push a lot of very macro themes with TV and then guide people to websites or emails to see the specifics. We saw that the last 10 years when websites became popular, as they became, basically they added 20 more seconds of negative attacks in every 30-second spot because you didn't have to go point by point on your plan. You just had to say you had a plan, go to my internet site to see it. The problem was the only people going to the internet site to see it was the opposition research or the other campaign. So, it's evolving, but I do think you're going to get closer to a sell the brand with TV, push the details with other medias.
Or do you think I should go back to putting money in canvassers and phone books?
I think they all have to work together. I mean, I think demographically, this country right now is in a very interesting place. And Simon, I think, showed that well in the front end, is you've got, especially when you compare it to likely voters, you've got kind of the baby boomers and the kids of the baby boomers right now moving into likely voting age. They consume media very differently, but they, obviously the parents are more likely to vote than the kids. So I think campaigns have to address these in a couple of tiers. I mean, I think that's one of the things Obama's done pretty well with the niche radio and the other things that he's done is he's using TV to kind of appeal to one audience. He's using the internet and things like radio to appeal to other audiences. Obviously, the technologies that are available through cable and other targeting aspects allow you to steer that in even closer if you want to. So, I mean, I think that's sort of directionally, you're going to basically have strategists that are going to have to start working together to take common themes out over different medias.
I actually have a slightly different view on that based on what I'm seeing in the commercial world. It may play out differently in the political arena, and it's interesting because we work in broadband video also, so we're agnostic to the platform. But what's interesting is we're actually seeing what folks are using the targeted messaging for commercially is to actually bring more selling of the model in line also with the brand. So for example, we work with 7 out of 10 of the top auto companies, and the single biggest thing they're using us for is more variation on model and offer to make a more high-end direct response, in essence, more effective. And it was interesting to me that you were saying that was one of the more effective things you saw in terms of time shifting, because that is where our retailers are going, that is where our financial services folks are going. And so, I actually think the challenge is no matter how low the broadcast ratings get, or the cable ratings for that matter, they still dwarf almost any other medium. And so if you have the challenge of getting a message out to a mass audience or pretty darn close to it, I think you're going to start to see a lot more mass customization, but there's no medium that has been shown to have the power that sight, sound, and motion delivers. And so I think you're going to continue to see a lot of use of this medium, just in a more sophisticated manner.
3 very rapid fires, just comments. The effectiveness of television is getting worse, better. So first, there's always been ad skipping. We all know that. It was never measured before. So before DVRs, it was people going to the bathroom and everything like that. That still happens, right? So the fact that I can now better measure and tell you people were skipping or not skipping your ads, you also have to put that in the context of what about all these other households who went to the bathroom? So does this make advertising marginally, or very importantly, less loud in terms of its impressions? Yes. We just measured a lot better. Second point is, second 2 points are more positive points. So even though now you have a lot more skipping going on, things, you also have a fantastic feedback loop that you never had before. So maybe you can use data like I showed you to quickly determine, hey, these 3 ads aren't doing anything, but this one ad seems to be working for some reason, and roll that back into to other things that you do. So it's a fantastic feedback loop to make to quickly figure out what's working, what's not working, and hopefully incorporate it in your other messages. And the third one, and this is why I said I had the coolest job, it's a great feedback loop, not only in commercials, but there are so many other applications where this data comes back. We've been tracking American Idol. Now, I swear there's a point here on my data. So you remember that Grey's Anatomy I showed where I showed you the graph of viewership over time? So since American Idol has gotten down to the final 12 contestants, we've been doing this internally. Every week we've been watching that graph, and we have predicted correctly ahead of time who's going to get kicked off every week except one. We did it 5 weeks in a row, and we did it 4 weeks in a row, and got it right every week, and we couldn't sit on anymore, so we went public with it. I don't know if anybody read it, so we went public with it. And in 1 week, we went public with it ahead of time and made our prediction. We got it wrong. And then next week, we got it right. We got it right again, so actually 7 weeks in a row. The point is, how did we get it right, and how do we do all that? You looked at that graph, especially for the time-shifted viewers, and you lined it up with what performers were going on in what order. And the performers people didn't like, they were zapping right through. And the performers they liked, they were rewatching multiple times. And the people with the lowest viewership were getting kicked off. Okay. Fine, the point of my story is imagine that in a political context. Imagine that application around a debate. Imagine that around the nightly news. You can find out from real, passively measured data what people in their living rooms are watching and skipping through, right? It's not survey, it's not self-reported, it's not tell me what you care about, it's what you're doing when you're not thinking about it. And it just gets really exciting to me about how that could be applied in different ways. It works for American Idol, so it ought to work for it.
Interesting stat is that, the Will I Am video, which got so much play, the outside Obama, has been seen by about 4 million people on YouTube. More Hispanics saw Hillary's ads in Spanish in California than have watched that ad, right? So, watch the Will I Am video. So the key here is that, all this hype around user-generated content, it's still not even close to being germane, relevant, important compared to what's happening with the kind of scale and scope of what television provides. And it's something to keep in, it needs to be kept in perspective, I think, in this whole thing. So even though we're doing a lot of counsel on how to use the internet and so on, what was amazing, Evan, was your stats just about, so 4 million spent on the internet this cycle versus hundreds of millions in collective TV, right? It's still 100-to-1 ratio. Now, we're not talking about, when you spend on the internet, that's ad spend, that's not building databases and collecting names and all the other stuff that goes on, the Obama getting to the million and a half that he has, which is still a whole other conversation which we could get into.
And the other thing on the internet, just to point out, is that when we've looked at this over past elections, you see it basically drop off a cliff come June and July. So that's telling you one of two things, that either it's being used exclusively for building your list and fundraising, or that it's not working. And it's the first thing to get cut from the budget, and save the TV. So, it's just something to sort of look at in your own campaigns as far as, is it a messaging tool? Is it going to turn voters out in the last 30 days, or is it just going to be an organizational tool? Plus, I think that that some of the cost has gone up. I hear anecdotally that the money that's being raised with internet advertising is actually, leveled off from what it was 4 years ago because it's costing more to buy the internet ads. And also things like the email lists are getting sophisticated and built up, and cell phones and things that are portable. You don't need as much advertising to build these same lists. So that's just, again, just some of the things as we start to use these new tools and learn how to use these new tools, is sort of these lessons to watch for.
Maybe one more.
I
Craig,
just
we'll try to get you.
Yeah, Craig Gilbert with the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. Aside from spending more money, what are the 08 candidates doing much different? Are they using TV differently than the 04 candidates? When it comes to Spanish language ads, when it comes to local cable, when it comes to national cable, when it comes to tailoring, are there really concrete differences in the way they're using television so far in this cycle?
The only real fundamental difference is, and again, I think this has less to do with strategy and more to do with money, is just the proportionate amount of money that the Obama campaign has put into primetime TV. And just at the American Idol, we looked at the 44 markets that had commercial inserts for American Idol from Clinton and Obama before the February 5 primary, and Obama had something like 38 of those 44. Again, we were sort of calling it the American Idol problem, and this, I think, was less about Clinton not wanting to buy American Idol and Obama wanting to buy American Idol. It was just he has so much more money that there was no barrier to entry. But I think that the closest difference is really in the amount that's being spent, the timing that's being spent. But I don't think this presidential election will be a real big roadmap for presidential elections in the future, just because the circumstances are so radically different.
Well, there has been much more money spent on Spanish also. That we know, in part because there was almost no money spent before in Spanish, and there's been a huge uptick, in particular, led by the Clinton.
And again, that had to do with the calendar, where you had states like Arizona and California and New York. Even in Pennsylvania, where there's 3% Hispanic vote, both Clinton and Obama were spending a lot of money on the Hispanic station in Philadelphia. So, yeah, I think it's become a very important voting bloc, not only in general election but in primary elections.
And it's one of the reasons why you've seen it's not the only reason, but you've seen a 67% increase in Hispanic vote from 04, which is an enormous number for a low propensity voting group. And I think part of that is being driven that people are actually talking to them now, right? Which is they were an ignored part of the electorate before. Dick, you got to.
Yeah. I have a question about privacy. At the very beginning, Tom made this sort of nervous disclosure about not using or not having information at a certain level. But we know at the federal level, there's things like the Predator program, there's the Republicans' fault, there's the DNC's thing, there's whatever Harold Ickes has done, that people are pulling enormous amounts of personal information together into these databases. And particularly in the political arena, it seems to me that the tension between effectiveness of delivery and defense of privacy is especially acute. And yet, from a sales point of view, the more you know, the more you want to know. And I wonder if you all could address the question of, how explosive an issue do you think this is, and how much can you disclaim it?
So let me take the first. I'm glad you brought it up. I didn't know that I came off as nervous when I said it. Anytime in a public policy forum, it feels it's worth mentioning. Privacy has always been an important issue for TiVo, because when TiVo first was invented, one of the first fears that was brought up in the populace was, oh my gosh, yeah, this is a great device, but now people are going to be watching me, and everybody knows what's going on. So we instituted a privacy policy long before I joined the company that we still adhere to today, that I'm very proud of. And so when you look at, so let me explain it quickly, but with a little more detail. When you look at all that data I was showing, and the American Idol data, we saw that people were watching this or not that. So how do we know that, and what do we know about people? The technology is such that, well, first of all, every TiVo subscriber affirmatively acknowledges our privacy policy when they become a subscriber and says, yes, I agree to it. What do they agree to? They agree to the fact that we can collect on a completely anonymous basis viewing data from their machine. What do I mean by completely anonymous basis? When I collect the viewing record, all I get is a record of remote clicks. I literally do not even collect and have no way of collecting where that stream of remote clicks came from. So it's literally impossible to match it to anything. All I know is I got a file, and we use a sampling methodology. So every night I collect 20,000 anonymous random records of people's viewing activity. And each one of those 20,000 records is just a record of clicks. And as it's brought in from the server, back from the TiVo device, the only thing that's brought back is record clicks. So you can never go backwards and say, oh, but that was Tara's household. Now, that has limitations from a marketability standpoint. Oh, and by the way, when you agree to that privacy policy, you also have the option, and there's no penalty to do this, it's perfectly free will to say, you know what, I don't want you to have my viewing data, I opt out. Perfectly, it's easy to do, and it's right there. We publicly make that available. Almost nobody does it, but you can, if that level of click makes you uncomfortable. To solve our marketability issue, what we have created is also the option to opt in, take a step further. So there are some people who have volunteered, and we've recruited them, we've asked for volunteers, and we got 20,000 households to sign up and say, I will volunteer, and you can know my household. And I'll tell you something about my household. I'm a white 40-year-old male, I make not enough money, whatever, right? And when we collect those records, since they've opted in, we do pull back an identifier that's still actually anonymous, doesn't go to name and address, but says this is a household that has a white male who's 40 years old who does whatever. And that's how we are able to sell a product that also has demographics attached to it and things like that. So that is our privacy policy. That's how it works. And I'm proud of it. And we really aren't collecting anything that could ever go backwards.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. It always comes up. It's one of the things, frankly, we spend a ton of time worrying about. We have the dubious distinction of being the market leader in set-top box addressability for targeting, which is sort of one step further than what you're describing. And if you look again at the double-click analogy, they took quite a lot of heat for that in the early days, and so we too are very cautious about it. I tend to break it down into two things. One is real privacy issues. There are no real privacy issues in anything that we're discussing. I won't bore you with the detail, but the process is exactly the same as for direct mail and as for the internet. And if you've ever dealt with cable legal, you can be assured they have taken dotted every I and crossed every T. There's also some additional regulation on cable companies for how they deal with this. So if anything, it is actually more privacy protected than the targeted efforts you get every day. That being said, there's also the perception of privacy issues. And what we find in some of our own or shared consumer research is customers feel differently about the message coming in through their TV box or their behavior with the remote than they do about the internet or direct mail. For no rational reason, they just do. And I actually had a moment like that with my Sling box where I could understand it. I felt like the TV was watching me. It was irrational, but I felt it, right? So it's a very real thing. So what we've done just on top of a privacy policy that looks a lot like yours is for the time being, we've actually taken extra steps with our advertisers to try to address this perception issue as well, which is we've counseled our clients very strongly on how targeted or how personal the message gets, just from a consumer comfort standpoint. And second, at the moment, we won't do any behavioral targeting. What we found was our clients our end customers, the viewers, drew a line between being targeted based on household demographic data or knowing whether I was a customer or not versus, the joke always was, if I'm sitting around watching adult entertainment, I don't want someone sending me Viagra ads, whatever it is. So those are the extra steps that we've taken to try to address both pieces, but I think it's incredibly important for the industry that both the companies participating and, frankly, the press and legal folks who are watching tread carefully to make sure that consumers can get the benefit of what a lot of them say they want, which is more engaging, relevant ads without any concerns or alarm being raised over either actual or perceived issues.
Any final thoughts, panelists, before we go?
It's an exciting time to be in television. I think we've described a number of different efforts that are being used today more aggressively by commercial advertisers than by political advertisers. And we think or at least I think there's a lot of opportunity out there for you to jump on board now as well as in the future.
And so my final thought would be all of the technology that is enabling all this incredible amount of change, the fragmentation, the consumer control, has great consumer benefits. It has seismic implications for how marketing communications work. But it also offers a great feedback loop that has never existed before. And people who can take advantage of that data to make smarter deployments of their dollars into communication. So it's causing all these problems because of fragmentation and the control, but it's also offering more data than has ever been available. So you take that and put it to work for you, it can be a really powerful tool.
Yeah, and I would just close with totally self-serving comments, and that's just to say, don't hesitate when you're hiring media consultants and media buyers to, insist that they buy research and be willing to pay a few extra dollars to have access to that research, because the media markets are changing, the voters are fragmenting, they are consuming media differently. And don't just pick up the TV guide and think you're going to get it right. Just trust the professionals, but also just make sure that they're making the right informed decisions and they understand sort of what the makeups are in these markets, and you're matching your messages with the right consumers. So that would be my self-serving comment to end the day on.
Well, thanks all three of you very much. Just two closing comments. One is I want to acknowledge Joe Garcia, who's here, who's the former executive vice president of NDN, who's now leading a spirited charge to be the next congressman from Florida 25. So Joe, welcome. Thank you. Who's also using media in a very effective way. My wife loves your new ad, Joe, and so congratulations. And Joe was in a lot of our Spanish language ads that we did down in Florida in 2004. And then finally, just for the viewers at home and for anyone watching this, if you want to keep in touch with this whole conversation, because obviously behind all this is the sense that media really is changing. I mean, the way that we advocate and communicate is going through profound change. If you were doing what you were doing today, 2 or 3 years ago, you probably aren't doing it as well as you could be. And we're going to continue to try to be, through NPI, the New Politics Institute, and our newpolitics.net site, a handholder, an advisor, an uncle, a friend in trying to navigate what is a very, very different media environment than ever before. And certainly, I think I learned a lot today, so thank you all very much, and thanks everybody for coming. Thanks, everybody.